What went wrong? Let me be a simple quotation here. The late economist and foreign policy analyst, my colleague here at the Hoover Institution, Harry Rowan. Harry Rowan, by the way, was a lovely, humane, highly intelligent man. I say that because I'm about to read a quotation from him that suggests he was just mistaken. He wasn't always mistaken. He wrote this in 1996. When will China become a democracy? The answer is around the year 2015. This prediction is based on China's steady and impressive economic growth, which in turn fits the pattern of the way in which freedom has grown in Asia and elsewhere in the world. Close quote. Economic growth was supposed to lead to democracy in China, and that wasn't madness. There was the example of South Korea. Mm-hmm. First they got rich, and then they became democratic. And of Taiwan, they got rich, and then they became democratic. And you could argue that the American foreign policy establishment has lost a quarter of a century expecting things to go right in China, and they haven't. How come?
Well, I think these things are always somewhat overdetermined, but maybe if I had to come up with a simple mistake that people made was it was way too deterministic a view of history. There's nothing automatic about the way history can happen, and it's not that you get to $8,000 per capita GDP and you automatically become a democracy. These things can go in a lot of different directions. There's a great deal of contingency, and if I had to pick on you a little bit, Peter, here, it would be that there's that speech that you helped ghostwrite or write, right. Tear down that wall, Mr. Gorbachev.
Yes.
And it was effective, and the Berlin Wall came down in '89, and communism fell in Eastern Europe and in the Soviet Union.
Stop there.
But we can't stop there.
We can't.
because there were other people who paid attention to this, and there were people in China and East Asia who paid attention to this, and they drew some very different lessons. And the lesson they drew was that we have to make sure that we keep the Leninist part of the state running very strongly. We can have, you can have perestroika, you can have restructuring, but you can't have glasnost. And we're going to decouple them, and we're going to learn the opposite lesson because, you open things up just a little bit too much, and things fall apart. And I think for 28 years, I'd say at least '89 to 2017, we basically in the West read the events of '89 as that was inevitably going to happen in the East, mm-hmm. and China read them. It's not going to happen because we're going to learn from history. We're going to make sure it doesn't happen here. And the exact same events were interpreted in different ways, and they were probably not going to happen because China wasn't going to let them. And we were oblivious to this because we were just so convinced of this determinacy of history.
Right.
The riff I always have on this is that 2017, 2018 is the year that Xi became president for life, and that's the year that Fukuyama's end of history definitively came to an end. But there are all these reasons you could have said.
Right.
There was a lot of evidence earlier that things were off.
Okay. In your book Zero to One, I'm quoting all kinds of things. At least I get high marks for doing my homework for you, Peter.
The quotes are accurate.
Okay. In your book Zero to One, quote, China is the paradigmatic example of globalization. Its 20-year plan is to become like the United States is today, close quote. So China, this is another, I think, dated thought, but I'll let you tell me. China can only copy. It is incapable of genuine innovation on its own. And as long as the United States remains innovative, then we have the hope of remaining a step or two ahead of them. Yes?
Yes, I agree with that, but I would read it a little bit differently. So I do think that the West is still far more innovative than China. But if you're only one or two steps ahead, that's not very much. And so if things are copied very quickly, then maybe you don't need to innovate at all. You can outsource all the very hard R&D work to the West. You have a lot of deadweight economic costs associated with that. And then if you can just steal all the IP, that might even be a more efficient way to innovate. And maybe you're 6 months behind, but you don't have to be behind that far. And so I think that's roughly the way to think of a lot of the contemporary sort of technology races. If innovation happening in AI. And I think most of the breakthroughs, or just about all the breakthroughs, I believe, have happened in the West, but they get transmitted to China within 6 to 12 months. And so that's the kind of
not enough
dynamic
of
we
a
have.
margin for us.
So
All right.
yes, we're innovating, but it only gives you so much.
Now, you have said, actually, this is something else I have in here, but I'm not going to take the time to go back and find it, that one of the, so I'll paraphrase you instead, one of the signal accomplishments of the Trump administration is causing everybody to rethink, to reevaluate China. So Trump, we've got a number of different, what's getting all the attention is the trade policy, slapping on tariffs. The Wall Street Journal
Yes.
takes one whack at him after another's, arguing that we're harming ourselves. Bob Zellick in the Journal this morning was arguing we're doing far more harm to ourselves and our own trading partners than we are to China. Then you've also got, I believe, you'd know more about this than I, but I believe there are also stepped up intelligence efforts and stepped up enforcement efforts concerning technology transfers. Just a sort of open-ended question. How is the Trump administration doing in terms not just of waking everyone up to the danger of China, but the actual implementation of specific policy?
Well, I think this is all still very much a work in progress.
Right.
I do think that there has been a sea change on the perceptions with China, and in a way, the way I think of U.S. politics is it's badly tribal. It's too polarized. Most of the times, we just have this trench warfare with the two parties fighting each other. No one makes much progress. It's when you really win on issues when you get the other side to agree with you.
Right.
And I believe that on the China issue, the Trump administration has gotten the entire center left to agree with him. I think maybe Biden is still the one pro-China candidate running, and that seems like a catastrophic albatross for him in the Democratic primary this year. I think all the others are probably as anti-China or as tough on China as the president is. Maybe they'll be even tougher if they get in, because to some extent the Trump administration policies are still moderated by we're trying not to hurt American businesses, and I suspect the Democrats will be less concerned about business.
Got it.
But I think there's been a sea change on that. Yes, and of course the free trade theories are correct in theory. There are all sorts of, but in the real world, this stuff is always super messy. And if you're negotiating a free trade treaty, you want the person negotiating it to be one who's not a doctrinaire free trader, because a doctrinaire free trader will believe that the worse a job they do negotiating, the better a job they're doing. Because
Right.
if even if you concede everything and you get nothing from the other side, there still are these gains from trade. And that's what free trade doctrine always tells you, that you don't need to work very hard on these trade treaties. And the U.S. is really the only country in the world that believe that. Western Europe, Japan have in effect far higher. They have barriers to trade. You have tariffs in the form of VAT taxes. 15 to 20%
sure.
across the board on goods in Western Europe, Japan, and yes, if we got rid of all that, maybe that would be a sort of more efficient world. But we've obviously gotten to a very, very unbalanced point. The other metaphor I always give on this is that the basic flow is we have $500 billion that we import from China, $100 billion a year that we export to China, and in effect $400 billion of cash flows uphill from being saved by poor Chinese peasants and being invested in low-yielding U.S. government bonds. And so if you're looking at this from outer space, that alone tells you that it's just a completely crazy regime. But
what about if they want their peasants to finance our government debt? Why not? Right? That's the free trade argument, right?
But if we believed in globalization,
yes,
the way globalization is supposed to work is the less developed countries are supposed to converge. They converge, they grow faster. Therefore, you get a higher return on investing in them, and therefore capital should be exported from the developed to the developing countries. That is the direction which capital flowed circa 1900,
right,
when the United Kingdom had a current account surplus of 4% of GDP, and the extra capital was invested in Argentinian bonds and Russian railroads and all these different things. And the globalization ended badly in 1914, in the late 19th, 20th century, but that at least made sense.
Yes.
The money flowed in the correct direction. This time, we're in a much crazier form where the money is flowing the wrong way. That's not what Chinese peasants shouldn't be saving money in low-yielding government U.S. bonds or negatively yielding European bonds. They should be, investing in China where they should be getting a higher return, and so should we.
All right.